years ago. I was 8 or so at the time, and every day I would walk home from my elementary school. My house was a few miles down the road, so my mother thought it would be safe enough for me to walk by myself. It was a few months into the school year when it started happening. A beat-up-looking Toyota would slow down enough for a couple of white guys that looked like they were in their mid to late 20s to follow me and yell insults at me. I was chubby back then, so they would call me fat and much more hurtful things. I'll always remember the driver. He looked to be the oldest of the bunch, with greasy blonde hair hanging down and partially covering his pimple-scarred face. They would follow me until I reached the gas station that was halfway along my journey home. Then they would speed off, laughing loudly. For the first couple of weeks, I didn't tell anyone, thinking that they would get tired of it. They didn't. A full month passed before I told my mother about it. She, of course, was rightly concerned about me and asked me how long it had been going on for. When I told her a month, she grew even more concerned. Her being a single mom, she couldn't pick me up from school because she was at work all day. So her solution was to send my older brother to meet me halfway, thinking this would deter them. It didn't. Another 4 months went by, with them continuing to follow me and throw insults at me. Then suddenly, it stopped. A whole month went by without them driving by, and we thought everything was safe again. We were wrong. Suddenly, out of the blue, I saw the old beat-up Toyota heading down the road towards me. Only the driver was in the car this time. He slowed down the car, flung open the passenger's door, and proceeded to yell at me for me to get into the car. I was so scared, I couldn't even speak. I just shook my head no and tried to walk faster. He continued to follow me, demanding that I get into his car. I'll never forget the look on his face as he yelled at me. It was so full of rage. We finally got to the gas station, and I made a break for it. I ran inside the gas station and up to the gas station attendant. I told him what was happening, and he let me hide behind the counter. The driver pulled into the gas station, hopped out of the car, and came in. He demanded that the gas station attendant tell him where I was, claiming I was his daughter and I had jumped out of his car. The gas station attendant glanced down at me, and I shook my head wildly, mouthing that I did not know this man. The gas station attendant said he didn't know who he was talking about and that he had to leave the store immediately. The driver began to yell wildly and started walking around the store looking for me. The gas station attendant said he was going to call the police if the man did not leave. The man turned to him and said something I'll never forget. "I'll get that bitch, one way or another." The driver stormed out of the gas station and left. I sat there on the floor crying for what felt like hours. The gas station attendant called the police and had them come over. When the police arrived, the attendant told them what had happened. A police officer knelt down beside me and asked me my side of the story. I told the officer everything, how him and a couple others had been following me for months, how they would follow me and insult me, how they suddenly stopped, and how he tried to get me into his car. I don't remember much afterwards, other than them calling my mother and her meeting at her house. They took my mother's statement and then left. After that, my mother changed her work hours in order to come get me every day. For years, I lived in fear that that man with the greasy hair and pimple-scarred face would eventually get me. So to the man who followed me for months, insulted me, and eventually tried to get me into his car, I'm not that scared little girl anymore. We better never meet. To start this off, a little about me. I'm 20 years old, a woman, and not completely ugly. So sometimes I get creepers, and it sucks. I work as a bagger and a cart pusher at a big grocery store chain. while simultaneously going to college full-time. You meet all sorts of interesting people at work, which is where this story takes place. A few months ago, I was doing my regularly assigned duty of pushing carts inside from the parking lot. It's pretty physically exhausting, especially in the summer, but it's a good workout. We have a little sidewalk island in the middle of the parking lot for people to walk up to the store without worrying about getting hit by cars. It's got a few benches, too, where you can find the occasional elderly customer resting. I'd picked up a run of about 5 small carts and was headed across the flat part of the sidewalk island when a man sitting on the bench called out to me. Customers calling out to me is nothing new. People have questions all the time, but this man didn't have a question. He proceeded to tell me how pretty my hair was and that it was such a nice contrast between red and black. Really, it's more like an awkwardly dyed auburn, but I digress. Normally, such a compliment doesn't bother me, but he immediately followed up with a bunch of weird questions about me, like where I was from and how long I had worked here and whatnot, all while I was in the parking lot with a bunch of carts that I needed to get inside because it was busy. I brushed off his questions as politely as I could, but he still followed me halfway back to the store. After I got inside, I glanced out to see that he had returned to the bench, which faces our front doors, and that he was staring at me. Weird, but it was a 5 p.m. weekday rush, so I didn't really have the brain power to question it beyond that at the time. Over the next 2 hours, every time I glanced out there, he was there, on the bench, staring at me. He hadn't bought anything and hadn't talked to anyone but me. At this point, I'm sort of freaking out, so I go to Robert, one of the other cart pushers. Robert is built like a building and generally intimidating to look at, but he's as gentle as can be. I ask him to please take over my cart duties until the weird dude goes away, which he agrees to. About 45 minutes pass before Robert tells me he can't see the guy anymore. I figure it must be safe to go outside now, right? Wrong. I get out to the first cart corral and begin collecting carts to pull in when the same guy from before comes out from behind a parked car and starts in on me. I'm alone in the parking lot and it's getting dark. He's angry. He wants to know why I've been staring at him this whole time. I'm staring? I'm staring. He insists he's been doing nothing wrong by just sitting there and is generally acting very threatening. He's got about 6 or so inches on me, and I have no doubt he could outrun me if I made a break back inside. He's advancing in on me. I'm backing up, panicking. I don't remember what I said to him, but I know I was trying to placate him and also to ask him to please leave me alone. It's about 8 p.m. at this point, so most customers have gone home. The parking lot is almost empty. Thankfully, I get saved. A middle-aged woman, another customer, comes up and asks what the trouble is. The guy takes a look at her, realizes he's outnumbered, and storms off for the hardware store next door. I thank the woman profusely, and we both go inside to talk to my manager about what happened. My manager says to her immediately if the guy comes back, she'll take care of it. Thankfully, the guy never came back. I don't know who he was or what he was after, but I'm so glad that woman decided to intervene. This past week, I've been house-sitting and dog-watching a family friend's house. This house is right next to the local hospital, and it has trails and gardens, perfect for dog walking. So, I go about my usual walkabout with the dog, and on my way back to the house, I see this guy walking in the middle of the road. This man was holding on what looked like 2 heavy bags, strung on his crutches. as he hobbled down the road. I look at him, and he looks visibly tired and out of breath. I walk up to him and ask him if he's okay. I know with how close he is to the hospital, maybe he was confused or delirious and trying to get help or something. He looks at me, and very hoarsely he says, "No," and then goes in on this story about how the ambulance was called for him because of him falling off a ladder and then having an asthma attack. However, he said that he had no way of getting home because of the ambulance, and that he didn't have enough for a cab to get back to Washington, D.C., about an hour away. So, my dumbass self decides to fall for this and feel bad about his situation and offer him a ride, like a dumbass. He thanks me, and I tell him I have to put the dog back, and then I'll get my car. He waits at a nearby bench as I head on home to get my car ready. I get to my car and clean it out so it looks like I have nothing to steal, just in case he's faking. I grab a knife and put it in my driver's side door, then practice the clumsy movement of pulling out the knife and thrusting it into the other seat like an absolute dumbass, and then decide to go get him. I drive back to the bench and help him into the car, putting the bags in the back seat. He thanks me, and I begin to drive to the highway by cutting through town. Almost immediately, he gets a phone call from his children, meaning he just opened his phone and put it to his face and started talking. He says some bullshit about how he'll be there soon, and that he knows they're hungry, and to have their coach call him so he can explain, and the icing and cherry on top, and that maybe tonight they will find something good to eat in the dumpster. I see his phone is on the home screen, and he isn't actually answering a call, and called it done. Immediately, I pull to the side of the road, next to my local government center, and say, "Look, man, I'm sorry about your situation, but I don't feel comfortable to drive you any further. There's a bus that can take you from here, and I wish you luck." But he isn't having it. He starts off with, "You promised me," which I did not, and "I've got children, yada yada yada." So I call him on his bullshit and say that I know he didn't receive a call because I saw his phone on the home screen the entire time. He begins getting aggressive and picks up his voice, going on about how I promised him, still didn't, and that I need to drive him to DC so he can get his car. Right now, I'm fucking terrified, and I yell at him to get the fuck out of my car, but he refused to get out, saying he won't until he's in the city. So I get out of the car, walk to the other side, and open the door with his shit in the back and throw it down on the sidewalk. He then gets out of the passenger seat, and this is when I find out the crutches are fake too, and runs to get his shit that is now strewn down the sidewalk, yelling obscenities the entire time and how he will kill me. I close the doors, and he turns back to me, looking like he's ready to fight. Fuck that. I run to the driver's seat and then rip on out of there. I drive back to the house I'm watching and immediately have a panic attack, and then call the non-emergency police to report this guy. I start to explain my situation to the woman on the other line. I was walking my dog by the hospital, blah blah blah. Then I see this man on crutches. She stopped me there and gave a perfect description of him. African American, 5'6", short hair, yellow eyes. I tell her yes, and she immediately goes, "Do not drive him." Well, fuck yeah, I can see why. Apparently he's a homeless man, and his MO is robbing people once they get him to DC. I tell her his location, and then she informs me that they're sending an officer to his location, and then thanked me. My dumbass self is coming down from a panic attack, and then I say, "Thank you for your service," and then hang up the phone. Looking back, I realized I fucked up, and I'm an absolute dumbass. If any piece of advice that I can offer in my sage wisdom, as so clearly as presented in the story above, do not be nice to anyone ever, or you might get robbed. So, to the homeless man that I drove today, let's not meet. A few months ago, my sister started talking to a boy online named Ben. The two of them had a lot in common and were only about a year apart in terms of their ages. We didn't think anything of it at first, because it's normal to have online friends these days. My sister is really introverted, so it was nice to hear that she had someone that she could chat to. From what I understand, Ben was also there for her emotionally too, if that makes sense. My sister became quite attached to him. Ben also introduced her to a few of his friends as well. They all seem like your typical edgy teenagers, the kind that post selfies with emo song lyrics and stuff like that, similar to what she posts, basically. Ben seemed like a normal, caring friend, and even messaged me a couple of times when he was concerned about my sister being upset. He seemed genuine, and I was happy my sister had found someone like this. One day, my sister asked my mom if she could meet up with Ben in the city. He lived in another state and had organized to spend a week in our state with his aunt, so it seemed like the perfect opportunity for the two of them to meet up. They arranged a date and a time to meet in the city, and my mom and I accompanied her. When that day came, though, he didn't even show up. He made some excuse that his aunt wasn't driving him there, and we figured she was probably concerned about Ben meeting someone he'd only known over the internet. I'll admit, I did have a really bad feeling about their meetup while we waited for Ben to show, but I stupidly ignored it. My sister, understandably, was quite upset that he hadn't shown up. Ben messaged me to apologize to us for having to run around after him. He explained his aunt can be unreasonable sometimes. At that moment, I genuinely believed he was a decent person and wasn't lying about his situation. A couple of months passed with just the two of them chatting away like normal. At some point, my mom gets the idea that she and my sister could fly to his state and meet him and his mom in case she worried. Ben liked that idea, and so they ordered the flight tickets. One day, out of the blue, my sister burst into my room, clearly frightened. She told me to block Ben and the two friends he'd introduced to her earlier. When I asked why, she explained to me that Ben had been a cover-up identity for a person that had previously threatened her using another account. All the pictures he posted were from someone else's account. She found this out and confronted him. His two friends that he had chatted with on his posts and everything were all fake accounts run by him to keep up the illusion. The person, after being confronted by my sister, admitted that they were keeping tabs on my sister. They had been chatting for months, and she had likely told him some personal things too. The flights were immediately canceled after my mom found out, and we were all spooked about the whole thing. I still am, and I'm even a little paranoid about sharing this. We couldn't tell the police because my sister was a dingus and didn't keep a copy of the messages the account sent her. The account was taken down after we informed the guy whose pictures were stolen about the incident. So to whomever this person is, let's never cross paths again. The following story happened to me a few years ago. In hindsight, I was a lot more naive, and I've grown up a lot since, becoming more aware of the risks of using social media without privacy settings. A few years ago, I left my home country to start my master's course and new life halfway across the world. I do not want to share the name of the country I live in now, sorry. Besides my partner, their family, and my housemates, I didn't really know anyone in the area. The first few months were quite hard. I had never lived more than a 3-hour drive from my parents, so being 9,000 miles away from everything I'd ever known and loved out was quite difficult. I found myself using social media more than ever, Facebook, Instagram, etc. It was such a comforting feeling scrolling through my phone and seeing familiar faces, watching stories of friends hanging out in places we all used to visit together, getting to chat in my native language. It made me feel less lonely, and quite frankly, I enjoyed sharing pictures and stories of my new city. It was such a low-effort way of keeping in touch, and it made me feel as if I was still part of their daily lives. Side note, I'm not a social media influencer. I don't have a large following. Almost all people I know personally, and at the time, I followed back, thinking it was some sort of unspoken internet courtesy. I mainly posted pictures of landmarks, beaches, old buildings, anything I thought looked interesting and that my friends back home would enjoy seeing, since where I live now is heaps different from my hometown. One day, I noticed I had a DM request from an account I didn't recognize. It read, "Hello, Lynn. Follow me?" The profile picture was nothing out of the ordinary, a black and white photograph of someone's back, standing on a cliff or a mountain. Initially, I thought it was a bot, but when I clicked into the profile, I was surprised by the content. Beautiful black and white film photographs of different places around the world. There were no pictures where I could make out a face, and the About Me was very simple with a camera emoji and a name. Since I liked the content, I decided to respond to the message with a, "Hello, I love your photography," followed. I receive a reply almost instantly. "Thank you." They then asked how I was doing. I asked them what kind of camera they used. It was such an innocent, ordinary conversation. I thought nothing of it. The next day, I woke up to a row of notifications, all from the same user. They had liked every single one of my photos, going years back into my feed, and sent me more messages. In one, they asked me how I was enjoying X, the city I'd moved to not long ago. I gave a short one-word answer and a smiley face for good measure, but when they asked in what area I was living, I instantly felt weird and decided not to keep the exchange going. So I left them on read. This caused a flood of messages from their end, now apologizing for asking and explaining that they had asked because they swear they had seen me before and wanted to know if I worked at Anytime Fitness in X borough in my city, which I did not. Thinking this would end the conversation, I replied with a, "Sorry, I think you have the wrong person. I don't work there." A few moments later, I got another message asking if I was sure. I didn't reply, so they sent another, "You wouldn't lie to me, would you?" Then another, "Where do you work?" Buzz, 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 one after the other. At this point, I started getting anxious. I hate confrontation and used to get very anxious over any little altercation where I might have upset someone. So I unfollowed and blocked the account. I mentioned it to one of my housemates and my partner, both of which said it was just some internet troll with too much time on their hands, and I did a good job by blocking them. But after about a week or so, I received another strange DM request. The profile picture was a screenshot of a scene from the film Un Chien Andalou, and the profile had one single photo, the same screenshotted image. The message read, "Why did you unfollow me?" I blocked it immediately. After this, I started receiving a wave of messages from other fake accounts on all of my social media. The messages became more and more aggressive, calling me a liar and a cunt. Then randomly, I'd get one asking how my day was, or if I had watched a certain movie before. I tried contacting Facebook and Instagram, but honestly, I don't think anything came from it, except maybe the accounts were terminated. I changed all of my privacy settings to private, but still the messages continued. I was so overwhelmed and wondered why someone would go out of their way to do this to me. I had just moved country, started school, was trying so hard to start over somewhere so foreign to me. I'd never experienced any type of bullying back home. I didn't have any enemies. Who would do this? My partner suggested I screenshot the messages and get the police involved. But back then, I was so nervous to do anything that I just let it be. I figured the police would ignore a foreigner or tell me to grow a backbone, something I grew up hearing. This game of blocking and deleting profiles continued until my partner, seeing how upset this was making me, messaged one of the accounts, telling them to leave me alone and that they were contacting the police if they continued. The account was either deleted or blocked my partner because it disappeared and things went quiet. After a few weeks, I decided to reactivate my account on Facebook and return to Instagram, hoping things had cooled down, and they had. No requests, no messages. It had been almost 2 months since the start of this whole ordeal, and I was message-free. I was in a much better headspace and had made some friends, was enjoying my studies, my job. The incident became nothing but a creepy memory. But then, one day, while I was out grocery shopping at a shopping center, a 15-minute walk from my home, I felt my phone buzz in my pocket. My hands were full of grocery bags, so I ignored it until I got home. When I opened the message, it was from another unfamiliar account, with a black and white profile picture of just an eye. Immediately, my heart sank. My stomach started to turn. I started thinking, is this the same person after all this time? No way. My body started getting hot and a bit shaky. I opened the message, and all it said was, "Hi, friend." Then they had sent a link to a clip from Back to the Future. I was so confused as to why they were messaging, let alone sending a random movie clip. But then I remembered what I was wearing, a Back to the Future t-shirt. I blocked the user right away and deleted my profile for good this time. After that day, I'd never heard from them again. It's been a few years since then. I still don't have an Instagram account, and I only use Facebook to keep in touch with old classmates. I never post anything personal. Occasionally, I will share a Conan clip here and there. I never figured out who was messaging me, if it was the same person, why they were doing this, and worst of all, if they had been watching me. I don't know if it was a strange prank or pure coincidence, and in hindsight, it seems so silly how much it all got to me. But please, not to sound like an overprotective mother, be careful what you share when you take a location and who you follow. And strange, black and white Instagram user, let's not meet. Ever. The story has a lot of build-up. So, I met this friend online the summer before my junior year of high school. I was 16. His name was Flip. We clicked pretty instantly. Our senses of humor matched up, and I felt like we were really good friends. He was a guy, I a girl, but I never really held romantic feelings. Also, I was in a relationship. When I was 16, he was 19. I could tell he had romantic feelings, and he let me know 6 months into our friendship that he loved me. We didn't really have a stable friendship, as he flipped out a lot and would go extended amounts of time without talking to me. He told me it was because he couldn't bear to talk to me, knowing we can't be together because I was dating someone. But I know now that it was more of a control thing, and he wanted to stop talking to me to make me feel like I was missing something. He really hated women, really disliked women, and felt like most are just whores. He told me he felt like I was different, that I was the only true woman he's ever met. Really red flag shit. I was young, and I didn't really think much of it. Our friendship was only online, iMessaging and FaceTiming. Now, when he was on these tangents where he would abruptly stop talking to me, he would go on Twitter and make offensive, demonizing tweets about me to people, like awful stuff. When he came back, I would just ignore that stuff, because he would go back to being funny and nice. So he also had a habit of lashing out at people, taking revenge on people, and just making people feel like shit for fun. Another red flag. But I thought I was special and that he really cared about me. and would never do anything like that to me. I remember leading up to my 18th birthday, him being 21 now. He said to me, "When you're 18, you're sending me nudes. You don't get to say no." I brushed it off because I knew I wouldn't. But yeah, notice there's just this element of him wanting to dominate. Anyway, fast forward 2 years later. I'm now 18, freshman in college. In October, I broke up with my boyfriend, the same guy as age 16, and Flip took that as an opportunity. He would tell me he couldn't bear not seeing me, and that basically we have to meet or it's all over. Now, I didn't really have romantic feelings for him. My love for him was platonic, but I figured, I'll try the romance. I'll try to love him romantically. I couldn't lose him, so I impulsively bought a plane ticket to where he lives in December. My parents had no idea, and to this day, still don't. I was going to go away on a Friday and come back on a Monday. The college I go to school in is in a city with an airport, so it was easy to just Uber to the airport. This romance that I'm trying to project feels real, and I genuinely feel like I loved him romantically. I was finally going to meet the guy I loved. Now, leading up to the flight, about 1 to 2 weeks before, I started getting cold feet. I was questioning the legitimacy of my feelings and started getting on with a guy in the neighboring uni. I started catching feelings for him and kissed him a day before my flight. At that point, I'd already decided I didn't want to pursue Flip romantically and figured, hey, we've been friends for 2 years. When I get there, I'll tell him I only want to stay friends. Yeah, he'll be upset, but I'm sure our friendship is worth more than that, and we'll be able to have a nice, enjoyable time together. How naive I was. I decided to go on the trip anyway, thinking that maybe seeing him would reignite that fire. Upon arrival, I realized that I did not love him, and I was no longer attracted to him. Regardless, though, he was a close friend of mine for a very long time, and whether I felt a romantic connection or not, I wanted to meet him for the sake of meeting him, just how I would want to meet any internet friend. So it's time for the flight. It's very early. I remember sitting on the plane, contemplating walking out. I just really wanted to leave and not return. I should have listened to my gut. I arrive and go outside of the terminal. I see him sitting in his car, just staring at me, like a very malicious, piercing stare. After a few moments, he gets out of the car. He looks different. It's strange because we've FaceTimed, and I've seen pictures of him, but he looks different, kind of creepier. We hug and sit in the car. It's awkward. I feel awkward. We make small talk and awkward jokes, and in that moment, I wanted to be back in my dorm. We go back to his apartment, and we go up to his room. We smoke some weed, and I lay down on his bed to sleep. When I wake up, he's spooning me, trying to fondle me. I take his hands off and tell him to stop. Then I sit up and basically unload about how I don't want him romantically, only as a friend. He just started crying and begging me to tell him that I love him. I tell him I can't do that. He then stands up, drops crying, goes to the bathroom, and starts lighting stuff on fire. It smells like burning paper in the bedroom now. He comes out normally and just sits on his computer and plays games without talking to me. Now, the rest of the trip is just like a combination of him being kind and normal to him being completely evil. Here's some of the things he's done and said throughout the 3 days. He made jokes about me dying, would pretend to hit me and lunge at me to get close enough to watch as I flinched. Told me he almost sent a snap of me to my mom with a geotag of his town so that I would get in trouble. Told me he almost made me sleep in the car one night. Told me that one night while I was sleeping, he'd walk over to me and just start farting on me. This one was just fucking nasty. Kept telling me to shut the fuck up when I would speak or ask questions. Did it multiple times in front of his roommates, too. He was trying to feel me up in bed, and I kept pushing his hands away and he would keep trying and would say things like, "I know you want it, you're just holding back." Served me spaghetti and told me that he purposely used the moldy spaghetti sauce, hoping that I would get sick, and told me he was going to make me miss my flight home. He said he was planning to drive me to the opposite direction of the airport and drop me off in the middle of nowhere. So basically, I kept my cool, and when he would tell me these things, I would nod and agree and laugh with him. I was scared shitless, and I wanted nothing more than to leave. So I kind of keep it cool, and I spend my time trying not to upset him. Monday rolls around, and my flight isn't until 8 p.m. Around 11 a.m., he goes downstairs to leave, and in that time, I pack my bag and leave without him knowing. My plan of action is to run to the nearest shopping plaza and Uber to the airport from there. I wasn't about to Uber from his house. I'm almost to the end of the street, feeling free, when I feel 2 arms come up behind me and wrap around me. He's hugging me, mumbles something into my ear, and then turns around and deadass sprints back down the street to his apartment. I ran to the shopping plaza, called an Uber, and got in. I felt so much relief in that moment. I felt like I was free. I waited at the airport with nothing to do for 8 hours, but it was better than being in there. I look back and I feel like an idiot, like I should have gone to a hotel and I should have probably left, but I'm a broke college kid, and I was already scared shitless being here without my parents' knowledge. After I left, I blocked him on every social media outlet I have, including LinkedIn. He still has tried to contact me regularly for 4 months, but luckily I never told him my address or anything. So online friends of 2 years, let's not meet again. Since my last post here sparked quite a discussion, I've decided to post another one of my unsettling stories that are tied to local forests. I grew up in these forests, and I feel quite comfortable there. Nevertheless, I stumbled into a few unsettling situations there that would firmly stick in my mind forever. This was one such occasion. I was 18 at that time. One evening, me and my 2 friends, Mike and Paul, decided to go camping. Well, camping maybe isn't the right word, since we didn't intend to spend the night, only to chill and have some fun time around the campfire for a while. The plan was simple: head out, build a campfire, drink a few bottles of wine, eat something, and head back home for a good night's sleep. We met at my house when it was still sunny outside. We got ready and we headed out. Our destination was an old abandoned quarry in the middle of the woods, which was maybe 40 minutes from my house. Even though the quarry has a tragic and frankly creepy history, it's a popular place for such occasions. When we got there, the sky was already colored red as the sun slowly sank behind the hills. We quickly gathered all the firewood that we could so that we wouldn't have to look for it later. As the darkness fell and absorbed all of our surroundings into impenetrable blackness, we already managed to get the fire going. We were in a great mood, and we were getting ready for our first toast. That's when we realized that we made a horrible mistake. We forgot the corkscrew. We were trying to open the wine without it, but we quickly gave up because the bottles were quite expensive, and we didn't want to damage them. At this point, it was clear that one of us would have to sacrifice himself and jog back to retrieve the corkscrew. After a bit of haggling, I volunteered. However, I had 2 conditions. Firstly, they would give me a hatchet in case something went wrong along the way. Secondly, no pranks when I got back. Mike and Paul agreed without hesitation. They shoved a hatchet into my one hand and a flashlight to the other and sent me on my way. As I was jogging through the forest, I heard a noise resembling a wild boar. Suddenly, I remembered a warning I received from an older hunter a few days ago. He said that this time of year, boars were getting dangerous, especially at night. I was a bit nervous, but luckily I managed to survive with no harm. I arrived safely to my house, much to the surprise of my mom, who didn't expect me so early. I explained the whole deal. She just laughed. I grabbed the corkscrew and was back on my way. Not wanting to experience an unpleasant boar encounter, I chose another, slightly longer path, this time through an open field. After a while, I got to our spot. It was a small clearing, surrounded on one side by massive rocks, maybe 70 meters tall, and on the other side by thick forest. Somewhere in the middle of the clearing was our campfire. When I approached it, I realized that there wasn't anybody, although our backpacks were still on the ground, and the fire was burning bright. Great, we specifically agreed that there would be no pranks when I got back. Those dicks probably think that they're funny. I resignedly sat down near the fire while facing the woods. That's the only place where those two assholes could have hidden, I thought. I was really tired, and all I could think about was the taste of that exquisite Pinot Noir we brought with us. I really wasn't in the mood for their games, and I was getting quite mad. That's when I heard a snapping of twigs and rustling of leaves from the edge of the forest, maybe 30 meters from where I was sitting. The sound was rhythmical, and it was undoubtedly the sound of someone walking. I aimed my flashlight at the spot where the sounds were coming from. Between the trees, I spotted a tall person wearing a dark hoodie. As I shined my flashlight on him, he stopped walking, turned to me, and just kept staring motionlessly. Even though he was directly facing me, I couldn't really see his face. I shouted, "Paul, you fat bitch. I know you're trying to scare me. We all agreed on something, so stop messing around and come out." As I finished, the hooded figure just turned around and walked deeper into the woods. Exactly at that time, my phone started ringing. Hastily, I took it out of my pocket. It was Mike. I took the call and started barking at him. "Really funny, you assholes. I thought we agreed on something." "What are you talking about?" "I'm talking about you trying to fuck with me. I clearly saw you, so you can come out now." Mike froze for a minute. For what seemed like an eternity, all I could hear was his heavy breathing and Paul mumbling something in the background. When he finally snapped back to reality, he just said, "Dude, we're at your house. We heard some footsteps. At first we just thought that you were trying to fuck with us, but then we got scared and decided to look after you. I forgot the phone at your house, so we couldn't even call you. Just get the hell out of there, and we'll come back for our stuff together." "Bullshit. That's just another of your funny pranks, and I'm not buying it." "Hold on a second." For a while, all I could hear was some incoherent mumbling. "Hey, what's going on?" asked the voice of my mom, coming from the phone. My head suddenly spun, and my heart skipped a beat as I realized that they weren't kidding. Suddenly, a freezing wave of fear ran through my body. However, I managed to convince my mom that everything was just fine, that she didn't need to worry. She gave the phone back to Mike. "Just leave everything and come back. We're headed out now. We'll meet you halfway there." "I'm not going anywhere alone again. You better get your asses here and do it quick. I'm waiting for you." I hung up. I didn't wish to make any more noise than I already did. I quickly turned off my flashlight and started to back off from the light of the fire. I moved all the way to the huge wall of rocks. I figured that if I had my back covered by the rocks, I would eliminate one of the possible ways the unwanted visitor could approach me. I was standing there in complete darkness, trying not to make a sound, while tightly clutching my hatchet, which would be, for the next half hour, my best friend. I had to constantly convince myself not to curl up into a ball in fear. Even my own body started to betray me as my hearing got worse due to my savagely beating heart. I was trying to calm myself, but then again, in worst case scenario, every little bit of adrenaline would help. After what seemed like an eternity, I spotted 2 weak light beams coming from the forest. I heard Paul shout my name. I've never been so relieved. I finally ran out of my hiding to greet my 2 friends. For quite some time, we were just standing there, laughing like maniacs from relief. We were even getting a bit cocky, and we thought about staying. After all, there was just one, supposedly, creep lurking between the trees, and there were 3 of us. Funny, just minutes earlier, I was shitting myself with fear, and now I was suddenly full of tough macho bullshit, thinking, what could possibly happen? In the end, healthy judgment got the better of us, and we decided to leave. We packed our things, put out the fire, and got out. We took our bottles of wine to enjoy somewhere else, somewhere where it's nice and brightly lit. Almost immediately after getting my undergraduate degree in philosophy and classical civilization, I landed an entry-level job in a related field, waiting tables at a high-end local Tex-Mex chain while studying and saving up to accrue yet more debt in graduate school. For those of you who are or have been in this line of work, I will be preaching to the choir, but double shifts and clopins, closing one night and opening the next morning, pickup shifts, camping tables, tend to pile up and wear on the soul. Certain vices become ever more enticing to those who wear non-slip shoes, stumbling off a shift out into the deserted shrines to consumerism that are suburban intersections, flanked on all sides by shopping centers. And I felt the draw as much as the next. But despite a very strong genetic predisposition, I avoided the more damaging habits. Alcohol and nicotine, sure, but where did I go to spend some hard-earned cash after refilling umpteen bowls of chips and serving queso-drenched chimichangas? Across the street to the Chipotle, of course. Don't judge. I digress. So, although the 2 restaurants are basically kitty corner from one another, the accessibility of both parking lots and the idiotic stoplight timing makes the trip approximately 1 cigarette long. I step out to finish my cigarette and unbutton my salsa-stained shirt. It wasn't that bad. I was just inexplicably self-conscious about wearing another restaurant's logo into the store. And as I do, a silver Mercedes with highly tinted windows comes screeching to a halt about 2.5 spots to my left in the handicapped spot closest to the store. 2.5 in that his parking job perfectly matched his choice of parking spot and assholishness. I say that because the driver of this car hops out and quickly jogs up to the door before calmly proceeding to the counter when he realizes it's still open. He glances back a few times. Embarrassed that someone saw you? You should be, I thought. At this point, I was already feeling, fuck that guy, and imagining what I would never say to him when I got behind him in line. I finish my cigarette, stomp out the butt, and turn around to fling my shirt into my already cluttered car. As I turn back, the passenger door of the Mercedes opens up, and a young woman sort of crawls out. It took me a second to register her presence, because I could see asshole driver still inside, probably reaching over the sneeze guard to point at the pinto beans like an asshole, and I don't register her first timid request. She repeated more frantically and coming towards me, clutching her purse close to her chest. Can you please help me? She must have seen me looking from her to the car to the asshole, because she glances over her shoulder and then back at me. I've got warning bells and nope signals blaring in my head, but thinking she may just want to bum a cigarette or something, when I don't instantly match her apparent growing level of panic. She looks right in my eyes and says, "Please, can you call the police? He's..." As if the pronoun were a command, all 3 of us look at each other. Her and I glance at him and see him turning to glare at us, even though he's probably 40 yards away, and inside, I see confusion, shock, and rage register on his features almost instantaneously. "Please," she begs. "He's trying to kill me." At this, something deep inside me flips on, and my actions that follow are deliberate, clear, and without panic. Believe me or don't, but what follows is my best recollection of events that followed, and would be happy to address anything that is unclear or unbelievable. I fling open my rear door, simultaneously apologizing for the mess, a coat, some bags, books, and whatnot, and telling her to just shove the stuff out of the way or just hop on top. It doesn't matter. It felt like she dove in head first. I still had no idea what was going on, but my first priority was safety, and that means dialing 911 and getting it ringing before starting my car, putting on my seatbelt, and checking my surroundings. The young woman is sobbing in the back of my car, and I saw assholes sprinting towards the door of the restaurant. I'd like to tell you I pulled a perfect tire-squealing reverse 180, because that's what it felt like, but it was just a very quick and jostling point turn. Meanwhile, the 911 operator picks up, and after briefly giving my name and location, just in case, I handed the phone to my passenger to explain the situation so I could focus on the escape. As I mentioned before, accessibility for this parking lot is shit, so I had two choices: go out the nearest entrance next to the Chipotle and risk getting caught at a light, or quickly dash away from him to the far one. I chose the latter, but before I got to the main road, an idea hit me. A standalone bank broke asshole's line of sight, so I ducked into the crowded parking lot of the restaurant on the corner of the strip to hide. It was more public and populated, avoided a chase, and gave the police a stationary place to locate us. But I underestimated asshole's speed and determination. As I pulled into a spot with my lights off, I see headlights accelerating down the small road through the lot. He must have seen me, because he nearly drifted the sharp turn into our would-be hiding spot. My passenger begins screaming at me to get the fuck out of there, almost louder than my own gut saying the same thing, and she goes back to try to explain her situation to the operator. Thinking ahead and being very lucky, I had chosen a spot from which it was possible to exit forward, and he had to either pull the world's tightest turn or go around the row. So we got a head start on the chase I was trying to avoid. I pull onto the main road and accelerate, lucky to catch a green light. Unfortunately, so does my pursuer, who is on my bumper out of nowhere, brights on, and honking like a madman. Because I'm following normal traffic laws like a dumbass, he pulled alongside my car and matched my speed. I noticed my passenger is having difficulty describing the situation, because seriously, who wouldn't? Sitting in the dark, cluttered back seat of a stranger's car, being pursued by a man who has, apparently, threatened to kill her? I calmly offer to help, because why the fuck not? It's not like this is the point in the movie where the tinted windows roll down and an automatic weapon sprays the side of my car. I take the phone and begin calmly giving the operator the street, our direction, speed, and a description of both vehicles. The operator informs me that no units are in the immediate area, but asks if I can get to a safe place, right as I'm racking my brain for where on earth we can go. Asshole pumps his brakes, began swerving to block the road, rolled down his window, and began pointing over the car, indicating for me to pull over. If it weren't terrifying, it would have been hilarious, but it gave me a chance to give his license plate. Just then, another car came up on us, and asshole got confused and made room. I take the opportunity to try to get out from behind him and start coming alongside him. He accelerates to match my speed, and I can't get ahead of him. Once again, I'm in the terrifying position of driving parallel with another car who doesn't want me on the road. Another bright, frantic, idea pops into my head as the raised median suddenly ended to my left. I told my passenger to hold on, and as quickly as I tried the shake and bake, I slammed on the brakes and pulled the U-ey. It took a second for asshole to correct, but soon he was on my bumper, but I wasn't about to let him pass. I slowed down to a crawl and cut off a few attempts of his to overtake me and informed the operator of our new direction and speed. I think asshole put 2 and 2 together because his attempts to pass me became more frantic, and so did the honking. Short of me hopping the curb, we were on a quarter-mile stretch of road without an exit, the same panic I had just felt seconds before going the opposite way. Unfortunately, the operator informed me it would be a while before units were close enough and asked me to get to a safe place. Right about this point, the road widened for the left turn lane, and asshole is beside me once again, and the light is red. We both speed up, but I can see over his car that no traffic is coming from the left, and at that last second, pull a hard right up this road where there's a church parking lot teenagers would use to practice driving. I could run around there for a while until the cops show up. Operator informed the responding unit to go there, just as I see asshole swinging left, nearly getting sideswept as he speeds off in the opposite direction. I head to the parking lot and circle around until I see red and blue, just in case. I thank the operator, park, and help my passenger out of the car. I offered her my jacket, which she refused, and a cigarette, which she took. As the officers began questioning her, her story gave me chills. To make a long story just slightly shorter, and because I don't want to violate privacy for a story I was doing my best to stop eavesdropping on, she had been seeing this guy for a while, and he became increasingly more violent and demanding. That night, he told her that they were going to move in together and beat her nearly senseless when she refused, then grabbed a bunch of stuff, dragged her to the car, and was going to take her back to his place. Even in the dim parking lights, I could see the bruises on her arms. He was a courier, always coming and going through the area, and had his truck parked somewhere in the direction he fled in. She told the officers he was armed, which explains her absolute panic. That didn't sink in until I got back to my house, after the officers realized I was just an unrelated, if shaken, party to the actual crimes, and sent me on my way. But another fact that still gives me chills, the Mercedes was her car, which I could recognize if it followed me home. But asshole knows what my car looks like, and the area I used to work. So, asshole driver, let's not meet. This past New Year's Eve, I went away for the night with my 2 best friends and one of their moms. I was home for the holidays from college, and my friend Sarah invited me to go to Palm Springs to celebrate New Year's with her mom and our friend Rachel. I didn't have any other plans, so I decided to go with them. We went to a cool city about an hour from where we live that is big on shopping and resorts. We planned to have a pretty calm night, watch the ball drop at a block party thing downtown, have a few drinks at the bar. Since we're on the West Coast, the ball drop is at 9, so at around 8, we ventured from our hotel, walking to the block party about a mile away. On the way, we passed by a very lively bar. We decided to stop by and spend 15 minutes dancing, but didn't get any drinks. It was a gay bar, and Sarah and Rachel, being gay, they were stoked on it and wanted to come back after the ball dropped, even though it was about 90% men there. We continued on the block party, get some dinner, a glass of champagne. The ball dropped, and they had a DJ, so we spent about an hour there dancing. After we got tired of it, we decided to head back to the bar and hang out there until midnight. Once we get there, Sarah's mom pays for a drink for each of us, but leaves soon after that because she was tired. It's about 10:30 at this point, and Sarah, Rachel, and I are enjoying our drinks and having fun dancing. Rachel tries some of my drink, since it was one she hadn't had before. I constantly have my guard up when drinking in public, and I felt safe at this bar because it was 90% gay men who I thought would not have any interest in me. I went back to the bar to get a second drink, and that's the last thing I remember. The rest I've gathered from Sarah and Rachel. Almost immediately after getting my second drink, I asked Rachel to go to the bathroom with me because I wasn't feeling well, even though I was completely fine 10 minutes before. Once in the bathroom, I just collapsed on the floor and was almost unresponsive. Rachel, now worried, somehow drags my half-lifeless body out to where Sarah was waiting for us. Security, seeing my condition and assuming I was wasted, asked us to leave. Sarah and Rachel decide to take me back to the hotel about half a mile away. By this point, I was unconscious and there were barely sounds escaping from my mouth. They saw someone leave the bar at the same time as us, who was walking near us, but they were preoccupied with trying to keep my lifeless body off the ground. At one point, I threw up all over myself, both of them, the sidewalk, etc. The next part of the story we had to get from Sarah, and Rachel doesn't have any memory of this. Still struggling to carry me, the man they saw leave the bar approached them. He was hitting on Rachel, trying to get her to go grab a drink with him. She was very agitated and told him to leave. Her friends needed help right now. He didn't take no for an answer and continued to follow us down the street, asking if they want to get drinks with him, if he can help carry me, and such. A middle-aged woman witnessing this came up and told the man off, something along the lines of, "Stop harassing these young women, or I'm going to call the police." He left after that. Next, by some miracle, an EMT and his wife, enjoying the holidays, ran into us on the street. He checked me out to make sure something wasn't majorly wrong, and then carried me the rest of the way to my hotel and into the room, since my friends could barely hold me up. They thanked him profusely, and him and his wife left. This is where Rachel's memory kicks back in. 5 minutes later, they get a knock on the door, and it's the EMT and his wife again. They came to let us know that a man followed us to the hotel, and they just saw him hop the gate and start to make his way to our room. My friends called hotel security, but they were unable to find him. My friends didn't get a glimpse of him, but I'm sure it was the same man from earlier. I spent the rest of the night vomiting everything in my body and dry heaving after that. I woke up the next morning in a pile of pillows and blankets on the bathroom floor. My last memory was at the bar getting a second drink, and my friends filled me in on everything that had happened. Feeling like crap, I thought I must have drank way too much, but I had never blacked out before in my life, and the amount of drinks I had, 2 in 2 hours, since I didn't get to drink my second at the bar, didn't add up to me being completely unconscious. We decided my first drink had to have been drugged, since Rachel had some of it and had no memory of our walk home, even though she was fully functional. I'm sure that the man that was talking to Rachel and then followed us back was the one that slipped something into my drink. To this day, I don't really know how I could have been slipped something. I got my drink from the bar and never sat it down. My best guess was that it was already in the cup. Thankfully, I had good friends and kind strangers protecting me that night. It keeps me up at night, thinking what could have happened under different circumstances. Before I start, I know a lot of people come here and say this is 100% true, etc., and half the time it seems as though they've lied. I will go to say that what you're about to read is real. The events happened, and I still to this day don't understand it, and don't expect you to either. Theories and possible explanations are hugely welcomed. I work in a well-known clothing retail store in the UK. I'm not allowed to say which store or company, as in my contract, I'm permitted to talk about the company in what could be perceived in a negative way. And I work in the stockroom as part of the delivery stock team. About 2 or 3 weeks before Christmas 2014, maybe in between, I had asked my store manager if I could work some overtime to get more money for Christmas presents, and she thought this was a smart move, as my stockroom manager was out of the country on holiday visiting family also. Nearing to Christmas, the deliveries get pretty big, almost 3 times the size of regular deliveries, so there was the work available for me to come in and complete. It would involve stripping clothes from packets and hanging them within the stockroom. My manager had asked that rather than come in on a day I don't usually work, I work there part-time, that I should instead stay for additional hours past my contracted ones, which meant that I had to lock up. My manager trusted me to do this, as I've worked there for almost 3 years now, so she handed me her master key. The only other master key was with my stockroom manager, who is currently out of the country. This is where it begins. The time was nearing to around 8 p.m. at night. All of my colleagues had left the building, and I had locked the door after them, turning off the store music, and secured the bottom loading bay where the deliveries come in. I was in the stockroom on the 2nd floor, putting some hangers on the racking so that I could use them for the next delivery. I was stood underneath a puppy teddy that was stuffed between a pipe and a wooden piece of racking facing me. The teddy was an old toy from a delivery that was left behind, and my colleagues had given it a name. The name I can't remember because the teddy isn't really spoken of much. It just sits there. My iPod was plugged into a pair of speakers that had been in the stockroom since forever, and I was happily completing my task. Happily, until I heard a noise. Yes, that might sound cliche, but this noise was very familiar to my ears, and it was the noise of the bottom loading bay shutters being opened. I thought someone must be in the store, as the only way to open and shut them is from the panel next to them from the inside. So I paused my music and proceeded to walk down the stairs out back to the bottom loading bay. It was when I was about halfway down, the noise suddenly stopped. What I can say that always creeps me out about the place is that the lighting around the corridors, staircases, and stockrooms were lit up by strip lights, and these strip lights had sensors on them, so whenever you walk under one, you'd hear a small click, and it would come on. So there I was, gliding down the stairs. Click, click, click. I burst into the loading bay, expecting to see one of my colleagues. Below and behold, it was empty. The shutters were shut. I embraced a shudder down my spine and simply span around and paced back to my workstation in the stockroom. I illuminated the strip lights and continued to hang some more hangers, the music from my iPod playing along, calming my nerves, until I remembered I turned my iPod off. I span around, horrified, and just stared at my iPod over on the shelf. As I took a breath and shook my head, I caught a glimpse of where the teddy should have been sitting. I was drenched with panic and took a step back to look further down the stockroom, about 100-yard stretch, where I had suspected a culprit had fled, only to face darkness. I stood for a moment, still bewildered by what had just unfolded, when I heard a faint click. I instantly moved to my right to get a good look down the stockroom, but yet I still faced darkness. Click, click, click was all I heard, gradually getting louder, closer. This is when Pavlov's theory kicked in, and I realized no lights were switching on in sync with the click. No lights switched on at all. I turned to the door to see my only exit route and then span my head around to be greeted with a dark figure in the distance. The figure was big, what I can only describe as perhaps a bodybuilder male. I need glasses for long-distance things, and usually only wear them in the cinema or at football games. Anyway, the darkness didn't help. Within his hand, I could see a small object, although when the hand clutched at it, I could make out that it was the teddy. This is when I felt adrenaline scream, run, out of the stockroom, down the corridor, through 2 doors, straight into the ladies' toilets, opposite the 2 offices. I ran straight into one of the 4 cubicles, the middle one, and locked myself in. I crouched on the toilet, crouched and shaking, partly because I'm a tall guy, and partially because my heart was hammering in my ears, putting my balance off. The doors of the toilet took a while to close slowly, as they should, and listened out for anybody to be approaching. The doors shut closed, which gave me a little relief, and I stopped and blinked, thinking for a moment. I wiped the sweat off my brow with my left forearm. As my head turned to meet my arm, I glanced down at the bottom of the cubicle. A face was just there. A face was pulling away from underneath, just as I caught a glimpse of the mouth and nose. My only description is that the teeth were black and seemed slightly bloody from a self-inflicted wound, and by the grayish skin tone and wrinkles, the person was old. I was injected with pure fear when I screamed, "Fuck off!" and kicked at the door, making it shake and slam, echoing around the walls in a thunder. I swang the door, looked back, took a deep breath, and braced myself before darting out of the toilets into the front of the store. I was charging along, prepared to attack anything to save myself from injury, yet nothing stood between me and the front door. I unlocked it with shaking hands and ran outside. I knew I had left my coat and iPod inside, but I was eager to get out. Locking the sliding doors behind me, I span to the shutter lock on the wall. It's located at the bottom of the wall for a reason I'm unsure of. It's always been a hassle for people. I turned the key inside the lock, and the shutters were descending. The store shutters were on the inside of the store, just past the alarms, and as I crouched there, slowly watching the shutters come down, again, I witnessed the figure, still holding the teddy in the middle of the shop floor. It was dark outside, and it was dark inside at this point. The shop floor lights are different and have to be switched on in the office. I closed my eyes and begged the shutter to hurry as it hit the floor, and I snatched the key away and ran down the road to the high street. My phone was in my pocket where I always kept it, so I called the police and told them what happened. I told them I believe a male had broken in. The police arrived shortly, and I let them into the store. I had them escort me to the office to turn the lights on, and as I reached the office, I noticed the computer was on. I told them this wasn't on before, but they sped me up to turn the lights on so that they could search the store. After touring them around the store to search, even the lift, they found nobody and told me to go home. The officers had said that they would contact my manager tomorrow. The next day, I arrived at work at opening time, even though I wasn't scheduled to work. I was greeted by different officers from the night before and my store manager. We proceeded to go to the office just after my manager had opened the store, and I let my colleagues set up. The officers had said that they would continue a search that day and night again, and that my manager should ask for CCTV to be installed. The reason our store doesn't have cameras is because the theft rate isn't high enough to have them, apparently. We all think that's dumb. Then again, We get away with messing around sometimes. I walked to the stockroom to get my iPad and coat before leaving when one last stab of fear yanked my heart to my boots when I glared at the teddy stuffed back into its usual place. I was allowed 2 contracted days off that week to rest. I think my manager thought I was seeing things and needed to sort myself out. I returned to work as usual. I was happy to do so, as it was within the daytime, and the store was full with people. Nothing has happened since. I still don't know how it was possible, or what happened, if it was a prank, or some people had a motive. Some people think I'm crazy. Some think it might be a group. Tell me what you think. It was the worst experience of my life. Background. A few years ago, my parents and I moved out to the Maritimes. My parents were retiring, and I was done high school. Our house is situated at the very center of, and I mean this literally, a village. There are 20 people in this place at the most. The house is 300 feet from the road and has forests surrounding it, except the front, which are fields that border the driveway. Anyways, the year we moved, I ended up moving away to Ottawa for school. That same year, I went back home for Christmas between semesters. I'm your typical night owl, and my parents hate it. They were bugging me about sleeping in so much because they hadn't seen me in months, and I was sleeping away all of our time together. The incident. That night, I stayed up until sunrise, hoping to fix my sleep cycle. It was about 5:45 a.m. when my dog woke up and came into my room. She rested her head on my lap, and so I knew she wanted out. I went downstairs, made myself a tea, and then put a coat on. For whatever reason, that winter it didn't snow much, and this particular day, it had snowed around 2 a.m. I remember because when I went to the bathroom, I got excited when I saw it falling. Anyways, I put on my coat and headed out with my dog. Usually she bolts out the door. She's fucking insane and does laps around the house at full gallop, but this day she didn't. Instead, she put her nose to the ground and trotted slowly around the house. I thought it was weird, so I followed her. That's when I noticed the footsteps. My parents' property has 3 buildings on it, a 2-car garage, a workshop, and the house itself. The driveway runs from the road and sort of pools, connecting all 3 buildings. The buildings make an L shape. The snow that had fallen was only 2 centimeters or so, and so I noticed, running from the forest, the bottom right point of the L, behind the house, a set of prints. I was extremely curious, so I followed them. They literally came out of the forest and ran around behind my house, where they stopped at a window. I lined my feet up and found myself looking in the window. Then the prints turned 90 degrees and vanished into the forest. That's when I realized the snow had fallen around 2 a.m., so whoever had left these prints must have come after that, or they wouldn't have left prints, obviously. And well, I assume most of our world is dark between 2 and 5:45 a.m., so either this guy was wandering the woods at night, what the fuck, or they had wandered up when the sun came up, also known as in the last 40 minutes or so. So I shouted for my dog, and we hustled inside. I told my dad, and he told me that he'd left the prints, which is bullshit because I was up all night and heard him snoring. Thanks for trying to calm my nerves. Anyway, though. It was early spring 2016. I just turned 24 years old. My friend and I just reached our main spot to camp, Black Canyon Rim Campgrounds, just outside of Payson, Arizona. We'd usually travel out here 2 or 3 times each year. It has some incredible views and is only a couple of hours away from the city. For the most part, this area was pretty secluded. A privately owned convenience store rested a few miles away, with a small town 20 miles before that. The entrance was on a dirt road, directly off the highway, with a campground sign at the start of the road, marking local wildlife, any fire hazards, and general news relevant to camping folk. The pathing is mostly linear, with maybe one fork spanning several miles. We once traveled down the dirt road to see how far it would take us. One of the paths would take you to another highway entrance with the ranger's tower halfway there. The other path led to a dead end. An abandoned cabin can be found on this path a few miles in, mostly hidden off in the distance behind some larger foliage. The snow had mostly cleared up at this point, leaving for crisp air, a slight chill, and the fauna becoming active again. We'd usually spot some wild horses, several deer, and tons of little critters when we'd come out this way. It really was the perfect time of year for a relaxing trip, to get away from the city for a few days. We got in around 4 p.m. on a Tuesday. It was late for us, as we'd usually try to make it out there by noon the latest. This trip was pretty spontaneous. We both had work during the coming weekend and decided to just go for it. The sun was setting fast, and we still hadn't picked our spot to camp. There were maybe 2 other groups, both families, parked somewhat close to the entrance, only a few hundred yards away from the highway. This time around, we just wanted to get away from humans for a while. Customer service jobs will do that to ya. We drove down the dirt road, past our usual spot, and finally picked the perfect area, a small clearing just hanging off the edge of a hill. The whole valley could be seen from this area with a beautiful sunset. This would have been our main spot from then on, if the next night's incident never happened. We agreed to get a campfire going and would just avoid building a tent this trip. We didn't have much time to do so anyway, and her car wasn't that uncomfortable. I'd sleep in the back seat, and she'd take the passenger seat, with the window slightly ajar. We'd have a few blankets for each of us, and would fall into that unrivaled slumber. The next day went fairly uneventful. We just decompressed. I had this strange feeling throughout the day, though, like we were being watched. There were crunching of leaves just out of sight every few hours, but I figured it was just the local wildlife doing their thing. My friend didn't notice anything unusual, so I didn't dwell on it. Night came, and the feeling still hadn't gone away. My friend must have felt something she didn't vocalize, though. She took some of her sleeping pills. She didn't usually need to take them on our camping trips. The nature's ambiance was enough to put anyone to sleep, I thought. It was nearly 1 a.m. My friend dozed off in the passenger seat while I attempted to wind down in the back. I leaned against the side window, behind the passenger seat, legs outstretched to the car's back door. The window opposite to me was rolled down slightly, with a cold breeze flowing in. I had been on my phone, scrolling through Facebook or whatever, when I heard something outside. A few crunches of the fallen leaves, several paces outside the car. I whispered to my friend, "Did you hear that?" But she was already out. I put my phone down and listened intently for a minute or two. Nothing. It must have been a small animal, curious of the camp. I went back to my phone, scrolling through social media. About 10 minutes had passed when I heard it again. Crunch, right outside the door. I lowered the phone. My eyes took a moment to adjust from the light of the phone into the deep dark of the woods. As I turned the phone away from me, the black light illuminated the window above my feet. To this day, I can't get the image out of my head. 2 dirty, scabbed hands held onto the window. The fingers wrapped inside the car. The nails were long, unkempt, and dark. Behind the window, A silhouette of a face was pressed up against it. The breath would create condensation every few seconds. All I could make out were the reflection of those empty, black eyes. I couldn't move. I couldn't scream. It felt like eternity, the staring contest between me and this thing. Thoughts were repeating incessantly in my head. Why haven't they ran away when they saw that I noticed them? What were they planning? Is this the face of death? After probably 10 seconds of not doing anything, the hand slowly unclenched the window and receded into the darkness. The condensation on the window dispersed. Another couple seconds passed before I heard the dreaded crunch, 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 melodically fading into the distance. I still just sat there. What the fuck just happened? Why didn't I do anything? Why am I still not doing anything? With that, though, my body shot into adrenaline. I pounded on my friend's seat, waking her up from her slumber into a dizzy confusion. I unlatched and kicked open the back door and took a moment to scan the area. Whoever they were, whatever it was gone. I scrambled to pick up any important camping supplies we left outside and just crammed everything into the back seat and trunk, periodically looking over my shoulder, listening for those footsteps. I slammed the back door shut, and there they were, a grim reminder of the horror that just happened. 2 handprints imprinted on the window. I quickly wiped them off the window in a panic, a reaction to erase the event, I guess. I jumped into the front seat, started the car, and floored it out of there. My friend, finally coming to, asks me what the hell I'm doing. "We gotta go," I said. "There's someone out there." I didn't see whatever or whoever it was while fleeing the scene. Speeding down the dirt road, my friend insisted I slow down, and I eventually did. We reached the highway, and I proceeded to drive 20 or so miles before we reached a Denny's, where my friend asked for us to stop at to eat and explain everything. The nightmare subsided a few months later. My embarrassment continues to this day for the state of shock I was in at the time. Everybody says you either have a fight or flight instinct, and I'm confused whether I had either. I mean, I just sat there and did nothing. I frequently tend to ask myself who was out there. Another camper messing with us? A resident of the abandoned cabin down the dirt road? Or maybe something more paranormal residing in the forest, watching lone, vulnerable campers as they drift off to dreamland. We'd still go camping there in the years ahead, but never too far from the highway. Whatever it was, I hope it was the last I've seen of it. It's been a while since we did a road trip across western U.S., April and May this year. On our journey, we came across the Shasta Trinity National Forest as we've been heading back to the West Coast. Literally, in the middle of nowhere, I asked my boyfriend to stop along the highway as I needed to go for a little pee in the woods. I jumped out of the car and searched for a place where I could do what needed to be done. Meanwhile, my boyfriend was waiting inside the car, leaving the windows open. As I was so concentrated on not peeing on my shoes, I didn't really notice something around me and went back about 3 minutes later. As I approached the car, I noticed my boyfriend being kind of alert. I sat down on the passenger seat as he locked the doors, turned to me, and said, in a really serious way, "Did you notice it?" I was like, "What?" Him, "Didn't you notice? There's not a single sound in this forest. No birds singing, no clicking noise from the trees or animals, not even the sound of wind in the leaves. Like that place would just absorb every sound of life." We closed the windows and continued our journey without any incident. Although it's been a while since then, and we're back home in Europe, this experience is kind of stuck in my mind. Maybe it's because we're not used to the American wilderness, or being miles away from civilization. I don't know, but there was something special, something eerie about the fact that the forest just absorbed every single sound. I found out that that area around Mount Shasta is well known for mysterious sightings and encounters. Does anyone else have a similar experience with Mount Shasta? There is something about this place. When I was in elementary school, I lived in a house that creeped me out from day one. I never felt comfortable there. I always felt like I was being watched. I refused to even sleep in my own room because my room gave me extremely bad vibes. I cannot explain why I felt so uncomfortable in that house so immediately, but the vibes were completely off. My animals also reacted poorly to the house. My dogs would bark and growl at nothing and would stand over me at night as if they were protecting me from something. Sometimes I'd hear weird things, and the dogs would also react, so I knew it wasn't just me. When I was around 9, I was sitting in the living room floor and playing with some toys while I watched TV. My grandma was passed out in the chair near me. I heard something, thought it was my dog, and turned to look at the hallway. I saw a tall, black shadow figure move from the hallway across the living room right in front of me, and then through the side door to the side patio. I was extremely freaked out and ran off to go look for my dogs for comfort. They were in the backyard, so the sound couldn't have been them, and nobody else was in the house. I often slept in the guest room. For some reason, it felt safer than my own room did. The window in the guest room overlooked the side patio that the shadow figure went through the door to. Almost every night, without fail, my dogs would bark and growl at the window and stand over me or lay directly on me as if they were protecting me from something. After this incident, I didn't feel truly safe anywhere I slept. I would be up most of the night, too creeped out to fall entirely asleep. Other things happened in this house too, but that was the most notable for me, as it was the first time I saw something unexplainable. I was not asleep. I've never had sleep paralysis. I do not have schizophrenia. What I saw completely changed how I view the world. I've had a lot of unexplainable experiences since then, but this one shaped my beliefs in a major way. Last weekend, my 5-year-old and I went tent camping in the Uintas, northeast of Utah. The weather was overcast weather. By the time we got done paddleboarding, we made our way back to camp. Once we got back to camp, I couldn't shake this feeling of unease. I mostly shrugged it off, thinking I'm overthinking the safety of my child. One thing to point out, there was a trailer and truck close to us, but I never saw anyone through our experience from there. At around 8 p.m., we started our campfire. We roasted broths and ate snacks. During this time, I would think I heard a crack or subtle movement and thought it was just the embers popping. Once the sun finally set, I noticed it was completely pitch black outside the reach of our campfire, most likely due to the overcast weather. At this point, I decided it's time to pack up our food and take it to the car, but I had this sudden feeling that I was being watched, and I decided to turn my headlamp light on. I faced 30 degrees to the right of me. About 40 to 50 feet from us, I see a small bush-like tree. I want to explain, this bush-like tree was not thick or sturdy enough for someone big to lean on or climb onto. And above the tree standing behind it, I see 2 big circle white eyes with a hint of purple staring straight at me. The animal, or creature, was far enough from the glow of the fire I couldn't see a silhouette of a body, but it was close enough that it was odd behavior, and it was only seconds from us if it ran towards us. My first thought was it was a bear standing on its hind legs, just being curious. It looked to be 8 feet tall or so. As I had my light facing the creature, who was abnormally close to our campsite, I grabbed my kiddo and bear spray and told my kid there's a bear behind the tree and assured him we would be fine. This creature just watched us intently. Suddenly, a few seconds later, my intuition screamed, "Get out now." I then started walking backwards towards my car and told my kid to walk slowly with me. The creature made no movement and tilted its eyes on us as we moved away until my light could no longer reach it. I can't explain this new type of fear I was experiencing. It was unnatural. I think prioritizing my boy's safety allowed me to get us to the car in a much more composed manner. Once in the car, we waited 30 minutes to see if it would come to the campsite to look for food, but nothing happened. I thought perhaps it left and we could sleep in the car to be safe. I decided that I'm going to try and grab blankets from the tent, put out the fire, and we can pack out first thing in the morning. I thought wrong. The campsite from the car was about 150 feet away. To the right of us were big trees, and to the left of us is tall grass and brush. I get out of the door and turn my headlamp on. My light shines towards the brush, and laying low in the brush, I see the white eyes, again, staring up at me. I decided to try and act big and yell out at the creature, but it made a move towards me, which in return made me jump back into the car and reverse. I tried to shine my car lights towards it, but couldn't see anything. I decided to find help. I drive down and find a friendly fellow dad camper who is happy to help me pack things up to leave. He arrives with a much brighter flashlight and his truck. As I'm packing, he sees the eyes and mentions there's 2 of them. He states that they're not moose, deer, cougars, and if it's a bear, it's really odd behavior, and he doesn't know exactly what they are. I face towards where he's shining his light, and I see a second pair of white eyes. At this point, I'm terrified. One of them is standing tall, while the other is lower. This time, they are much further back, as if they now know there's a new reach limit to the light devices being used. It wasn't until the lower set of eyes decided to stand up and be much taller than the first one, looking monstrous. This made my new friend very uneasy, and he quotes, "This has got me on edge. Let's just throw everything into your car and leave." The whole time we're packing out, I would catch these creatures, creating a perimeter around us. They just walked around the campground in circles, waiting for something, it seemed. I try to think of rational possible theories, but the more I think about it, the more I can't shake this feeling that this could have been a skinwalker or something else. They were too smart, intuitive, bold, scary, and didn't act like normal wildlife. Any thoughts on these creatures would mean the world to me. Thank you if you read this. I was getting goosebumps retelling this story. In 2012, I was living in Rome for the summer. My apartment was very close to the Colosseum, but I was working as an undergraduate visiting researcher at the university. Every day, I would walk to and from work, which took about 35 to 40 minutes. One evening, I decided to take an alternate route that would shave off some time from my walk. Normally, I would have went through the main termini where all the people and shops are. This new route, however, had me cross the tracks further down from the actual station. As I got closer to the tracks, I noticed the area began to look really rough and that there were a lot of homeless people hanging around. I power walked through it and just avoided eye contact with everyone and eventually reached a small traffic tunnel. About halfway through, I felt someone come up behind me. He smelled terrible and was almost certainly foreign, as his Italian had a very, very thick accent, and he didn't look Italian. My Italian also wasn't very good at that point, and I couldn't really understand what he was saying. So I said, "Dispiace, non parlo Italiano." The guy still wouldn't stop talking to me, even though he knew I couldn't understand what he was saying. I just assumed he really wanted money or something, but would go away on his own when he figured out I wasn't going to give him any. We reached the end of the tunnel, and I was doing my best to just ignore him. I looked around and noticed the streets were abandoned, even though it was just after rush hour. I turned to him at some point and said, "Basta, stop, that's enough." But he just kept following me and talking. I'd begun to get nervous, but because he wasn't doing anything really threatening, I wasn't overly worried. When I reached a small stoplight, though, the guy's hand reached down and tugged at the bottom of my dress and sort of started to lift it. At this point, I felt threatened and swung my bag at him, which made him stagger a little. It was my laptop bag and was pretty heavy. It was enough for me to take off in a bit of a sprint. However, I noticed when I looked back, the guy was still following me, just now at a small distance. I kept jogging until I finally reached a small grocery store and ran inside. The guy was right at my heels. At this point, he was directly behind my back, so close I could feel his body heat. He then started reaching for my elbow like he was going to drag me out of the store. I shoved him off again and ran up to two other girls who were by the produce and seemed to be around my age, asking if they spoke English. When they said yes, I motioned to the guy behind me and told them the man had been following me since the train tracks. The girls' faces turned pretty serious at that point, and they started speaking rapidly to the guy in Italian. They then turned back to me and asked whether I knew him and told me that he was saying he was my boyfriend and that we had just been in a fight and I was lying. I told them I'd never met him before and had no idea who he was. I'd say that the fact that he couldn't speak English and that my Italian was limited to telling people I couldn't speak Italian and asking for the bathroom made them certain that there was little way the guy actually knew me. One of the girls then left to get the manager, who promptly threw the man out and told me he was watching on the monitors to make sure he went away. After the manager realized the man wouldn't go away and having him attempt to re-enter the store about half an hour later, he called the police. The police arrived, and I told them my story. By that point, the guy seemed to have finally left, probably scared off when he saw the police coming. The manager then gave me a ride back to my apartment, so the guy couldn't follow me, just in case he was still lurking around. Luckily, that was the end of that, and I never walked past the train tracks again. I think I got lucky to have found the store, but it still taught me a very valuable lesson about being careful about the areas you venture in new cities. Now I ask the locals for areas to avoid instead of wandering around foreign cities on my own. Let me preface this story with a few things. I'm not the best writer, and I've not posted here before, nor do a lot of people know this happened to me. I'm turning 22 at the end of the month, and this event happened almost a decade ago, yet I still remember it so clearly. I still think on it often and bring it up to my family, as uncomfortable as it makes us. It reminds us on how dangerous the world really is. As a little backstory, growing up, I've always had extremely fair skin, blonde hair, and light eyes, the kind of thing that specific creeps unfortunately go for. When I was around the bend of becoming a teenager, my older sister, 8 years ahead of me, was in the military and had been gone for quite some time now. However, she was finally coming back home to old USA soil, a few states away at a base in Kentucky. My parents and I were excited and planned to leave for the weekend so we could finally go see her for the first time in years. It would only be a few days, but we were happy regardless. We ended up seeing her, of course, and had a few days to be able to go out and eat, open her accumulated Christmas presents, and go to a nearby mall in proximity to the hotel we'd been at. I'd never seen someone so happy just to wear regular civilian clothes. Right from the get-go, our last night together felt odd as we walked this mall. Just one of those creepy vibes you get from an unfamiliar area. It wasn't too long until closing, and at this time frame, malls closed at about 10 p.m. or so. I'm sure you know what happens at malls. You go in and look at everything. Unbeknownst to us at the time, the four of us come across the last store we would be stopping at for the night before leaving. We walk in, and it's not particularly a store we'd go into. Expensive streetwear clothing. Like the pesky 12-year-old I was, I go back and forth, pestering my mom and dad walking around the store as my sister looks around as well. Suddenly, my sister walks over to my mother as I'm near my dad and whispers something to her. A man with the most defined black mustache I remember had been tailing us and doing the typical retail routine. "Hi, is there anything I can help you with? Can I help you find something?" But he's being too persistent and only asking my dad these things. The man didn't speak broken English, but his accent was incredibly thick, perhaps Indian or Turkish, we think. My sister and mother walk out of the store and keep eyeing back at my dad, the "all right, let's go now" look. Now me, being 12, feeling even worse vibes. I don't understand why my mom and sister are wanting to leave so badly, but I start to catch up to them regardless. As my dad starts noticing us leaving, he begins to walk out as well, but the man stops him as I'm still in earshot. I found out at this point, the man had been staring at me almost the whole time, with my aloofness to the situation. He looked away from me and to my dad and asks, "So, how much for the little one?" My dad, visibly confused, chuckles uncomfortably, thinking it's some kind of really tasteless and bad joke. My mom and sister don't hear this and are still waiting for myself and my dad to catch up several feet away. "What?" My dad furrows his brow and replies, hoping for some kind of explanation. The man proceeded to say that he wanted to purchase me. Visibly protective dad mode now, and realizing the man is completely serious. "We don't do that here." His rising tone was palpable, and he starts hurrying me away to mom and sis, and we start leaving as he tells them what just happened. The whole drive back to the hotel, my sister is just consistently getting more upset, saying if she'd known, she'd kill the fucker. And honestly, I'm not sure there's really anything we could have done. But regardless, the entire situation was beyond uncomfortable, especially now that I realized the implications of what was going on. So, creepy mustache man, please, let's not meet ever again. I can scarcely imagine what kind of life you lead behind closed doors. This incident occurred about 11 years ago and involved 4 people. My sister, 10, my cousin, 10, his sister Kate, 12, and me, 12. It was a half day at school, so we got out at around 11:30 and walked to a pizza place about 3 blocks from my house. I know a lot of parents these days wouldn't let kids our age walk around a town without supervision, but we lived in a pretty small, tight-knit community. Anyway, when we left the pizza place, I noticed an older guy, maybe in his 50s or 60s, standing outside the door. I really only noticed him because he looked unkempt, stained oversized white shirt, and baggy sweats, and we didn't have many homeless people around town back then. I didn't really give him a second thought, and we stopped into the corner store for some candy and snacks. But then, he was waiting outside that store, too. I lingered a bit to let my younger sister and cousin walk ahead, something one of my older sisters taught me. Kate had the same suspicion I did, so we decided to test it. We deliberately stopped walking as he was crossing the street, and he stopped dead in his tracks, looking casually away when we turned to look at him. So this was one of those shit moments. We knew this guy was following us, but we didn't know what to do. We didn't want to walk home, especially since I only lived with my mom. We also didn't have cell phones. We walked down our block, and of course, he followed, which was another shit moment. So we decided to separate to knock on a couple of our neighbors' doors. One of our friends answered, but his parents weren't home, so he invited us into his backyard to play. While we were back there playing, this guy stood out front and just watched us, waiting. Finally, this kid who lived next door came by the backyard, and we went with him to tell his dad what was up. His dad came out to talk to the guy, who was standing in front of his house now, and their conversation went something like this. Kid's dad: "Hey, what are you doing out here?" Guy: "I live in this house." Points to the dad's house. Kid's dad: "No, you don't. I own this house. Why don't you get out of here? I don't want to see you around here again, or I'll call the cops." The guy went on his way, and we finally went home to tell my mom what happened. I saw him a few weeks later at a local boardwalk concessions place. I don't remember if he saw me, but nothing happened. I'm not sure what his plan was. There were 4 of us, then 6 when we went to the backyard. Maybe he was waiting for one of us to separate from the group. Maybe he just enjoyed watching little kids. I honestly don't know if I want to know. Guy who followed us home, I hope we never meet again. Quick backstory. I'm newly moved, 21 male, into my house, and I'm still not 100% familiar with my own neighborhood yet. The way the neighborhood was built makes it a rectangular shape laying down, with my house at the top right corner of it. Sorry if that's confusing. I can clarify later if needed. So the other night, around 2:30 a.m., I was at my house when I decided to take a break from playing guitar and have a smoke before bed. So I grabbed a smoke and started out my front door. About 3 or so minutes into my cig, I noticed this faint noise of what sounds like an old, creaky metal object that needs to get oiled. But the sound has a cadence, which makes it repeat every 2 or 3 seconds. After this happens for about 10 seconds, I notice that I can hear tires gripping on the road as well. Then, out of nowhere, I see a man who looks to be in his mid-40s, riding this horribly beaten-down bike that emitted a very intense, ear-piercing, high-pitched squeak every time he pedaled. As I stood in my driveway and he passed me, he kept moving forward, but his head slowly rotated left, and he locked eyes with me. I'm not kidding when I say this guy looked identical to Hannibal Lecter from the movies, but that's not what made my heart drop. As I'm locking eyes with him, and he's moving past my driveway, he suddenly gives me the scariest, widest, scariest jagged-toothed smile I've ever seen in my life, and continues to lock eyes with me. And this wasn't an ordinary smile. I'm talking When the Grinch Stole Christmas, ear-to-ear smile. With 15 more seconds, he continues pedaling and is out of sight. I can now just faintly hear his bicycle gears squeaking. At this point, I'm wondering whether or not he's going around my rectangular block of a neighborhood, and whether or not I can achieve this zig fast enough to get inside before he comes around again. As I'm doing this, I begin to hear the metal creak noise, but I also hear something different. I hear this dude laughing like a fucking maniac, which made me nope the fuck out of there. As I'm stumbling for my door handle because of the adrenaline rush, he begins to round the turn where my door is almost in view. At the exact moment where it would have become visible, I got my door open, ran in, and slammed it shut and locked it. No sooner does my door close do I hear the man from outside scream as loud as can be, "Where'd you go?" At this point, I went into full-out battle mode, ran around my house and turned all the lights off, battle crawled to my bedroom, and waited. As I lay on my bed for the next 30 minutes, I would hear the squeaking of the bike for about 30 seconds, every 3 to 4 minutes. About 30 to 45 minutes later, it finally stopped, and the man was gone. I've actually quit smoking since then, and haven't been outside that late. But every now and then, around 2:30 a.m., I can still hear the squeaking of the bicycle from outside my room window. Hello, my lovely friends. Before the video ends, I just wanted to say that I hope that you're having a good end of the year. I know that this time can be hard for some, but I hope that you're still having a good month. Thank you so much for hanging out with me today. I appreciate you. Stay safe and sweet dreams.